Hi, good evening, everyone. It is 6 o'clock and we will get started. Welcome. My name is Christy Diaz-Trahan. I'm the Town of Oro Valley Parks and Recreation Director. And thank you for Zooming in to our community meeting. Many of you joined us earlier this year when we were in the council chambers. And, there was a lot of conversation. There was shaking hands, patting on the back, sometimes hugs because we hadn't seen each other in a long time. Today it's a little awkward because right now I'm staring at a screen with a bunch of names. And so it's hard to get that body language in the feel, but hopefully we'll be able to tackle some of that later this afternoon, or excuse me, later this evening. So tonight, Mike Svets with Pros Consulting will be presenting an overview of the needs assessment findings, the level of service standards, equity mapping, and the framework in developing concept plans. The presentation will end with a list of additional work that needs to be done through this master planning process. Additional community meeting dates are Park and Recreation Advisory Board that we oftentimes refer to as PRAB. So if you hear that acronym, that's what it means, the Park and Recreation Advisory Board meetings. And the process, so that way we can get to the finish line. Our goal is to have this final document presented and adopted by Town Council in April. A lot of times master plans don't include conceptual site plans. They talk about land use, recreation programming, gaps of service, and specific programming, recreation implementation at locations, at parks, but they don't include concept plans. The reason this one is different is because, as many of you know, our town council developed a 2-year strategic plan about a year and a half ago. Included in that plan were 2 very important things. One, the development of a community-wide needs assessment, and then roll that into the master plan, which is what we're doing today. And then also, they wanted to include in the master plan conceptual site plans for 5 specific areas: Naranja Park, James D. Kriegh Park, Riverfront Park, the community center, and Steam Pump Ranch. And so as we work through the process, those conceptual site plans will be the next big thing, if you will, for our PRAB to address. They will be looking at those next week at their regular meeting. Before we get started, I do want to acknowledge and talk about the former Rancho Vistoso golf course. Earlier this fall, the property owner, Romsman Investment of Toronto, California, could not reach an agreement with the Conservation Fund, TCF, to purchase the approximate 208-acre property. Had the deal been consummated, TCF proposed to purchase the property with the stated goal of transitioning it to the town of Oro Valley for public space. But that did not happen. As such, the town does not have the legal authority to add someone else's private property within this master plan document. But please know the town has heard the community, and we have a commitment that in this final master plan, those desires will be addressed. In terms of this meeting, once Mike has concluded with his presentation, we will open it up so that way we can hear from you. Since this is not a public meeting in terms of council, parliamentary procedures, etc., we're not limited to a 3-minute clock. That said, we do want to be efficient and have everybody a chance to speak. So we would ask that you try to limit your comments to ensure everyone has that opportunity. We do have a goal to end this meeting within 2 hours, so right around 8 o'clock. I ask that once you have an opportunity to speak, let everyone else have that opportunity before you chime in next. When Mike is finished with his presentation, Brandon Lau, who is our meeting facilitator behind the scenes, will come on board and walk through the process in which how to raise your hands, comment, and what the cadence of that process is going to be. And so with that, I would like to introduce Mike Svets with Pros Consulting.
Thank you, Christy. Good evening, Oro Valley. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be back in front of you all. It's been a long time since January. However, I believe many of you have had an opportunity to engage in the process, whether it be through the project website, the community survey online, or the statistically valid survey. One of the things that we want to recognize is that we're going to provide a very brief summary associated with the community needs assessment. That phase was completed in May. All of that information is available for your reading pleasure, viewing pleasure at the Master Plan Project website, which is planyourparksov.com. I'll repeat that again later in the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen here very quickly and we will get moving. So there is going to be a lot of information, some of it very technical this evening. And but as Christy said, please kind of hold your comments to the end. I will have an opportunity to, refer back to a slide or two if you have very specific questions about that. So this evening is to summarize the prioritized needs again for you. We also want to talk about park planning in Oro Valley. So I will have Christy jump back in here in just a bit. An overview of park classifications, and really what this is to recognize that a park is not a park is not a park. There are different what we call classifications of them, and their intended outcomes based on size and amenities vary from classification to classification. We'll talk about level of service, and this is dialed into how much of any specific park acreage and or asset that you should have in your community. We will then look at the level of service based on recommendations through the lens of what we call equity mapping. And then, as Christy said, we'll dive into the concept plan framework for the town's parks, and then we'll inform you regarding the next steps and any questions and address any questions that you may have. So again, the prioritized needs, I know many of you have seen this previously, looking at it through the lens of experiences, programs, and services that you desire most. We've broken this up into high, medium, and low categories in terms of priority. I will not read these all to you again. I will just impress upon you once again that the things that are in the high priority are most desired by the community, but also have a significant level of unmet need. In other words, you want the town to provide more of these very specific experiences. The medium category kind of takes a step back. They are desired by the community, but a gap in service in terms of how they're being offered is not as great. The experiences in the low priority column simply are those that, as you can see, start to become very age specific and or skill specific. This is not to say that the town should not continue to do these programs or slightly expand them as the community grows. And I think that's a really important thing to note, that the community is going to continue to grow. And so though these may be meeting needs and don't have a high level of what we call unmet need, as the community does continue to grow and its demographics change, there will still be a need to provide more of these kind of programs, just certainly not at the same level that you desire in the, shall we say, the high and medium priorities. Same exercise for parks, facilities, and amenities. You can note that your top two, actually your top three, very much refer to trails. In addition to general park acreage, open space conservation areas, as well as other things that start to support your desire for special events, such as performing arts venues. Same exercise with regards to facilities and amenities in the medium category and low category. Again, it is not to say that you don't offer these things or you stop offering these amenities and you look to, shall we say, repurpose those spaces. It's simply the fact that you're very strategic about it, and if you are going to continue to offer it, you want to offer it at a high quality. So I want to turn back over to Christy to address some park planning in Oro Valley, maybe a little bit of history, and also a look forward in terms of how the town as a whole, this is not just specific to parks and recreation, but how the town as a whole has approached park planning in the past.
Thank you, Mike. I believe my video and sound is on. Mike, can you give me a nod of the head if that's the case?
Very good, Christy.
Okay, good. Thank you, Brandon, because I can't see anyone. Park development in Oro Valley and development community's role in developing parks. Those two bullet points really speak to what we currently have in place. So in terms of park development in Oro Valley, hold on, I need to pull up another document here. So the key large facilities that we have been acquired a variety of ways. West Lambert Lane was acquired from the state of Arizona via a patent. Honeybee Canyon Park was acquired from Pima County through a warranty deed. James D. Kriegh Park was acquired by resolution from Pima County, and that aligned with the town of Oro Valley's annexation of that general space. CDO Riverfront Park was acquired as a result of Pima County bond funding. Steam Pump Ranch was also acquired as a result of Pima County bond funding. Naranja Park was a warranty deed and outright purchase. We have a small little FOAG park that sometimes is referred to as a trailhead, and that was through quitclaim deed as part of the development agreement. In Greenock Park, very similar in terms of a warranty deed. Our trailhead systems align with development in terms of a quitclaim deed as a result of those trailheads being developed. So that's primarily how we have acquired our properties. The loop that runs through our community is funded through Pima County Flood Control District. And of course, the community center and golf courses were cash purchased by the town of Oro Valley. In terms of the development community's role, so planned area development has really been a cornerstone in terms of adding value and support to the public park system. And that has been part of the town of Oro Valley's philosophy for many years. And so those are typically your privately owned HOA parks. And as I said, they complement the overall system. Moving forward, so the town's approach moving forward is that we will work with our community partners to look at potential expansion of public parks and recreation that align with the community needs. So that's based on the information that Mike had just shared related to high, low, medium, high, medium, low priority. Specifically, you know, I've instructed Mike and his team to really delineate the need for those public amenities. Really, a lot of north of Tangerine. We only have one space north of Tangerine, and that's Honeybee Canyon. But in terms of what we would consider a traditional park, there's not a public park in that area. So again, working with the development community, working with the HOA community, working with the school districts, working with nonprofits. Is there a way that we can identify strategies in this plan to expand our park system. So that's what we have in terms of moving forward. And with that, Mike, you can continue.
Sure. So I'm going to jump ahead real quick because I think I want to show some mapping that speaks to what Christy just mentioned. So let me jump ahead and then I'll come back. But the one thing I wanted to share with you all is to recognize that the town park system, as Christy mentioned, is really kind of, this is the base map associated with this map is simply a land use map, and the areas that are in yellow are residential areas. The areas that are in orange are planned development areas that Chrissy just spoke to. And as you can see, with the exception of primarily the recent purchases associated with the golf courses, you can see that many and most of the park properties that the town owns and manages and maintains kind of fall within those yellow areas. As Christy mentioned, there is HOA parks, and you can see that there are a lot of dots. These do not necessarily comprise a ton of acreage. We fully recognize that. And this is something that needs to be taken into consideration when we talk about where the park system needs to go, the town's park system needs to go. And also, I think it's important to recognize that there just is not necessarily a lot of land that can be developed, that would add what we would consider to be a lot of park acreage. And so you can see that there is a significant balance of HOA parks that are dotted pretty much throughout the entire community. And most of them fall within either residential areas or, as Christy mentioned, those orange shaded areas, the planned development areas. And so when you overlay the town and the HOA parks, you can see the town has a lot of parks very geographically distributed throughout its community. The purpose of this is not necessarily to understand equity, but I think just general park distribution that kind of underscores how the town has approached park planning and park development, as Christy just mentioned. So speaking of parks, I did want to kind of provide you that park classification understanding. So I'm going to just I'm not going to speak to every point on this slide, but I think it's important to recognize that a park is not a park is not a park. So mini parks are really small spaces, typically 0.2 to 2 acres in size. They're not necessarily, they're not intended to carry major amenities such as athletic fields or amphitheaters, golf courses, things along those lines. They're really designed to kind of break up neighborhoods. They're designed to enhance urban spaces and allow green space or just open space to contribute to the quality of life, primarily in neighborhoods and or urban areas. The neighborhood parks is where you start to add amenities. And the first two categories here within Oro Valley have been primarily handled through the development community. So the development of both mini parks and neighborhood parks has really resided on the development community side of the equation, so to speak. But these are neighborhood parks are larger in size, 2 to 15 acres typically. That typical length of stay is somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour. They typically do not have restrooms in. They do have some restrooms in them. Other times they do not. It is just really dependent upon the amenities that are associated with it. If the length of stay is typically closer to 30 minutes, then typically you won't have a restroom. The length of stay starts to become an hour or more, you would have a restroom. They also have very limited parking, and the idea is to not invite everybody from across the entire community into these parks. Community parks is where the town starts to jump into the development and operation, management, maintenance of parks. So this is a Riverfront Park, for example, is a community park. And it has a lot of different amenities that it typically increases the length of stay up to 2 to 3 hours. You do have parking, you do have restrooms, and they can vary in size, sometimes 10 to 75 acres. We've seen some be classified even larger than that, but that's a typical range of a community park. Regional park is basically your regional park is Naranja Park. And though it's not fully developed, that's part of the process of this master plan is to develop a realistic concept plan that would expand upon the experiences currently in Naranja Park. But these are large spaces. They kind of become your signature park in your community, and in many cases are looking to draw folks not just and support the needs of the community in and of itself, but they have opportunities to provide experiences to those in the region. Hence, it's called a regional park. An example of that that currently exists in Naranja is the archery ranges, both the fixed archery range as well as the walking archery range. Another set of parks, special use parks. Your special use parks are really your golf courses. They're designed to kind of be a special use or a signature use. Length of stay, of course, varies. Sometimes you see communities develop a skate park as a standalone park or a dog park as a standalone park. Though those elements can be incorporated into such things as community and regional parks, they often do have a tendency to stand alone as well, to draw attention and really recognize that they potentially are opportunities for a regional service area. As you know, your golf courses draw people from outside of your community to play them, and however they're really singular focused with regards to the experience that they deliver. Conservation area trail parks. These are you have a couple of these in your community. Lambert, Honeybee, really kind of open space areas, and really the only amenities that you typically see within these are trails and trailheads, restrooms, parking locations. Typically, these are a minimum of 5 acres, and obviously they can be as large as you can imagine. Catalina State Park, and I'll touch on that a little bit more, is really a conservation area trail park that, as you know, is on the eastern borders Oro Valley to the east. Another park, Greenbelt Trail Corridor. And these simply are acreage that is meant to carry a trail. And one thing I do want to hit a pause button here is to recognize that we are still currently in the process of conducting a connectivity analysis. So we are not going to address Greenbelt and trail corridors as part of this presentation, simply because we're not there yet. But rest assured, we certainly are in the process of understanding where there are opportunities to create a better connectivity or synergy within your trail system, and identify where there are opportunities to potentially acquire acreage or easements on which to carry trails so that you have a better trail system, especially given the desire of your community. As I showed earlier, where trails were very much at the top of your list. So level of service, again, these are just the maps, town parks, HOA parks, and then the town and HOA parks together. So level of service is really derived from a lot of different sources. Community need is one of them. The ability for the town to actually acquire land is another. The ability for the town to financially sustain that property if it was acquired and developed is a third. We also look at emerging recreation trends, give you a couple of examples. Pickleball 5 years ago was just on the cusp of kind of becoming a sport that was popular throughout the country, and now it is one of the fastest emerging sports ever. So we take a lot of potential different data sources to kind of create what we call level of service. We also have to take into account population growth and how that impacts changing demographics and how that impacts the recommendations around level of service, which I said at the onset is really about right sizing your park system, not overbuilding it, but not underbuilding it, trying to create a plan that creates guidance for the development of parks, the redevelopment of parks, as well as then the amenities associated with those. So again, it is not strictly just community need that is factored into creating level of service. So the first thing we want to look at is what is that overall current level of service in terms of park acreage. So you see here the different park types classifications that I mentioned, and you see a couple of columns that are colored there. Town of Oro Valley is green. The other inventory, which is really the publicly accessible HOA inventory, and then your grand totals, not counting Greenbelt Trail Corridor and Conservation Area Trail Parks. And I'll explain why that's below the bar in just a second. But you have 14.6 acres of parkland for every 1,000 folks. So you're probably sitting there thinking, is that a lot? Is that a little? Yes, it's a lot. And what I mean by that is the typical range of acres per 1,000 people in a community is somewhere between 5 and 10 acres. When we start thinking, and this is just the developed park system, which is really mini neighborhood community regional recreation special use. Some communities throughout the country have wonderful opportunities to acquire open space conservation areas. And other communities do not. So when we start comparing Oro Valley to other communities, 14.6 acres of parkland for every 1,000 folks is considered well above the benchmark. When we think about open space, I think it's also important, as I mentioned earlier, to take into account that you have access to Catalina State Park. The only way to access Catalina State Park is through the town of Oro Valley. There's 5,500 acres that span Catalina State Park, and it's really just open space and conservation land. But I think it's also important to recognize that there are 31.35 miles of trails, and all of these trails are not what we would call difficult or at an advanced level. I think you look from the town of Oro Valley and you look up at Catalina State Park and you would think, my gosh, I could never climb that trail, or I could never go on a trail in that park. And that is not the case. There are several trails within this park that are at a beginner and or intermediate level and are really designed just for people to walk on. So I think it's an important distinction to provide some context around open space and conservation area parks that have trails in them. And you're very blessed to have this adjacent to your community. So when we think about the current level of service, again, I think I might have touched on this already. Yes, so I'm sorry, this is just the town's current level of service. So previously we talked about 14.6 acres per 1,000 folks being a lot. The town actually contributes 12.71 acres of that 14.6. So the vast majority of the park acres in the community are provided by the town of Oro Valley. Now, are all of those fully developed? No, because I think you can fully recognize that Naranja is 213 acres, and it still needs a lot of work in order for it to be fully developed. And that is part of our job as part of this. But also the town currently contributes all of the Greenbelt Trail Corridor and the conservation area trail park classification. When we think about HOA parks, as mentioned earlier when I showed you the map and went through the classifications, your contribution, the HOA's contribution to the community is through the development driven mini parks and neighborhood parks. And you can see that contribution level is about 1.9 acres. So again, there's a distinction between the business of parks that the town has been in, which is community, regional, recreation, special use, as well as the trail system and conservation areas. And then the business that the town has, yeah, I guess, partnered with and worked with the development community to provide smaller park spaces within planned development areas and or HOAs or simply just neighborhoods. So I think that's an important distinction going forward. When we also think about current level of service, we look at amenities and as well as indoor facilities. So I will not read through all of this, but it's the same exercise to recognize that you have a lot of park inventory within that acreage that you see. Long story short, I think one of the things that kind of jumps out at you when you look at some of this park acreage um, and the amenities associated with it is that you have a significant number of playgrounds in your community. You have one for every almost just under 2,000 people. A typical benchmark is one for every 3,000 folks. You also have a significant number of small group ramadas. This is in the neighborhood of one for every 1,500 people. Um, and then I think part and parcel because you're Arizona, we are in Arizona. You do have a lot of neighborhood pools. And this is one for almost every 2,000 people in your community. So if you think about the type of amenities that your mini parks and neighborhood parks have contributed to providing recreation experiences, it's really through basketball courts, playgrounds, small group ramadas, and neighborhood swimming pools. It does add in, a couple of reservable ramadas or tennis courts or volleyball courts, but the vast majority of the other amenities are provided by the town. And then, of course, down at the bottom, the town provides the community center, and we'll touch on that here in a bit as well. So when we think about the town, again, this is the breakout of what the town provides. And again, I'll show you the breakout of what the major focus of amenities are in HOA parks. So when we think about recommended level of service, I think it's important to recognize that there are a lot of variables that go into this. And so at this point, I want to pause and make sure that everybody understands a couple of key takeaways from this slide. Number one, this is a 10-year planning horizon. And when I know that it says 2035 standards, but parks don't just get built and developed overnight. There's typically a 3 to 5 year planning cycle. So the idea behind a 10-year planning horizon is to say, what can you get started on in the next 10 years so that you're able to meet the community's needs within a 15-year period? The other big takeaway here that you see is underneath the Greenbelt Trail Corridor and Conservation Area Trail Park. We have not applicable with regards to recommended service levels. And the reason is simply it does not make sense to put an acreage or a mile of trails based on population. It is simply about how do you develop and fully develop a connected trail system. So if you think about a wheel, a bike wheel, and all of the spokes, the idea is to ensure that you have the right size bike wheel from a trail system perspective, and you have all the spokes that connect to it. That creates connectivity. It's not about deciding whether or not the tire of the bike needs to be 20 inches or it needs to be 29 inches. It's about what is the most effective, efficient, and available land to develop your trail corridor system. Conservation area and trail parks are also really about opportunity. It is not about trying to say that you should have a specific number of acres around this. If you have opportunity and it's a community need, sure, absolutely. That is where you start to fall back on community need to determine whether or not you should have conservation area trail parks. It is not about having a very specific number tied to the amount of people that live in your community, because that number, you could overshoot it, and you could simply not have the opportunity to acquire that land, or you could completely undershoot it by simply stating you pass up on an opportunity to acquire that kind of land, just simply because you end up being beholden to a number. So our recommendation is really for the next 10 years for the town to focus on the development and redevelopment of its existing park system. Um, this is not to say that we are not going to acquire property for green belts or attain easements to carry the trail system. And it's not to say that the town won't purchase open space and conservation land. It's simply to state that we don't want you to be beholden to a number. When we think about the HOA acreage, this is where we've made some very strategic decisions. I think previously you may have heard me say to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board that many parks don't have a lot of value. And quite honestly, when you compare that value from a recreation experience to neighborhood parks, community parks, regional parks, they don't have a lot of value. Um, but what we want to try to impress upon the town is to encourage, strongly encourage the development community to focus on neighborhood parks and not a bunch of mini parks, and not a bunch of pocket parks. So the point is to recognize that we have increased the amount of acreage for neighborhood parks around a recommended level of service. And the goal would be to achieve an additional 21 acres of neighborhood parks in the town through the development community over the next 15 years. When we think about amenities, we're really focused on trying to enhance and understand the growing population. There is need for additional athletic fields. I know that it was not high on the priority list. However, when you think about the town's demographics, its current service level, its utilization of its existing athletic fields, there is a need to expand upon those in the community. We've also recommended 8 additional pickleball courts, which is very much in a little bit more in line with the demographic of your community. Additional ramadas in your parks, and a publicly accessible splash pad that you may not necessarily have to pay for to use. As of right now, your splash pad is only accessible through the Aquatic Center. And from an indoor recreation center space, we're really looking at 1 square foot per person, which would then, because of growth in your community, translate to an additional 4,000 square feet. This could be space that is redeveloped, for example, at Steam Pump Ranch, that would create indoor opportunities that would align to some of the higher priority needs, such as learning classes, art classes, education classes as well. So this is the HOAs. We are not going to recommend any more pools. We're not going to recommend any more tennis courts. We're not going to recommend any more volleyball courts, but we really want the focus to be on basketball courts, playgrounds, and small group shelters associated with that 21 acres of neighborhood park space that we're recommending. So equity mapping. This, again, I just wanted to reiterate where the town's parks are, where the HOA parks are, and then, of course, the town and HOA combined. We are only going to show equity mapping for the town's parks. The reason being is that um, it would be actually pretty much of a hot mess to try and show all of the borders of all of the HOAs on a map. The HOA parks are mini and neighborhood, and they're intended to be utilized by just the people that live in those HOAs or neighborhoods. They're typically not publicly accessible. However, as we've shown, they do meet a need that the town does not in turn have to provide. So I want to be rest assured that as we go through this equity mapping, you recognize that we are just mapping the town's amenities and not all of, shall we say, the 29 neighborhood pools that exist within HOA and or privately held neighborhoods. So you're going to see a series of circles on these maps, and that is intended to show you the reach within the community that each of these parks serve or each of the amenities serve. So I'm going to first describe parks because we're going to walk through the neighborhood or the park acreage equity maps. So there's a couple of factors that factor into the size of the circles. The first factor is simply the acreage of the park. So the smaller the park, typically the smaller the circle. The larger the park, like say Naranja, the larger the circle. The other factor that we're taking into when we talk about service area is density of population around each park. So you could have a park, two parks that are of equal size in terms of acreage, but one circle be larger because there's not a lot of people that live around it. And you could then have another park that might have a smaller circle simply because you have a lot of people that live around it. The intention is to understand that you want to provide equitable access, but you also don't want to create a park system that is either underutilized or overutilized. And I think we all recognize that parks such as Riverfront Park or even James or Kriegh Park um, have a tendency to potentially be overutilized part and parcel because there's a lot of amenities associated with each of those parks, but also the fact that there's a lot of people that live around them. So here is the park acreage maps, and then I'll stop and explain the amenities, but they're very similar in terms of the variables that go into determining the size of the circles. So your community parks, primarily Riverfront and Kriegh Park, you can see provide really pretty good coverage for your community. Again, I think you can see that north of Tangerine, there's not a lot of coverage with regards to the community parks. However, that is also very much associated with the fact that there is a lot of orange to the north of Tangerine as well. When we look at regional parks, Naranja Park does pretty much cover your entire community, with the exception of a small snippet just to the north and a small snippet just to the south. But it obviously also extends beyond the boundaries of Oro Valley, as it typically should for a regional park. When we talk special use parks, these are primarily golf courses, Steam Pump Ranch, even Thogue Park, which is, as Christy mentioned, a trailhead park. These are what they are. They are singular standalone parks, and you do have a lot of overlap within these circles for special use parks. Again, they have pretty decent coverage when you start to consider the heavy yellow areas, or primarily just the residential areas in the community outside of the residential plan development areas. And conservation trail parks, again, we are not measuring a service level associated with this because we're not recommending a service level. But you can see that there's actually really good distribution of conservation trail parks throughout the community. There is one north at Honeybee. There is, and then you can see east, west, and south. So I would say that if we did, you have pretty good geographical coverage in terms of north, south, east, and west. You typically would not find conservation trail parks in the core of your community, your more urban, suburban, areas that might be a little bit more commercial or might be a little bit more of that. So you typically wouldn't see those here, but you can see around the edges, you've got really good coverage. So when we start to talk about amenities such as golf courses, this also factors into not just the population density, but the actual number of these amenities that exist within any location. So in this case, you can see that the largest circle, we measure golf courses based on 18 holes. So you recognize that at the community center, El Conquistador is a 36-hole course. And you can see that that circle is quite large. And then Push, of course, is smaller simply because it does not have nearly the amount of golf course holes that El Conquistador has. But you can see that from a golf course perspective, the town is based on its recent purchase. The southern part of the community. And you'll also remember this. I'm going to hold on one second.
I think you're good, Mike, if you're
okay. Yeah, I just saw the unstable come up, so it's usually my microphone. So
we lost you for a second, but we can hear you now.
Okay, sounds good. So let it swing back up. So when we look at diamond fields, these are baseball fields that are lighted. You can see that you do have several more diamond fields at Kriegh than you do at Riverfront Park. But you can also see that your coverage is lacking to the north. This kind of indicates that in order to increase this coverage, we're going to have to think about how we potentially develop and or redevelop existing park acreage, such as Naranja Park, or potentially doing things differently at Riverfront and Kriegh. Multi-purpose fields lighted, you can see that because of Naranja and it being a little bit more centrally located in the community, that you get better coverage. Does it cover the entire community? No. But you do get better coverage just simply because of its central location in the community. And that's going to be really key because that's also the amount of park acreage that you have available to you to develop without necessarily having to redevelop it. When we think about off-leash dog parks, again, pretty good coverage, not again much to the north. But adding to Naranja or adding dog parks at another location might allow you to expand your coverage. Outdoor basketball courts, the town has been very mindful of this. As you recognize, there are a lot of basketball courts in HOA parks. And so the town has been very mindful of, I guess, recognizing that that is a neighborhood park amenity, more so than it is a community park amenity. But the town can do a better job of providing outdoor basketball courts given the minimal coverage that it's currently providing. Reservable ramadas, again, you can see that these opportunities are very much overlapping, pretty much have these kind of ramadas available in almost all of the parks in the town. And even at Honeybee up north. But again, we also want to remember that there are a large number of small group ramadas, as I mentioned, associated with HOA parks. Pickleball courts, again, some good coverage, but opportunities to expand upon this, potentially through the development or redevelopment of existing parks. Playgrounds, again, the city has, or the town has been very mindful of playgrounds. This is probably the fewest number of playgrounds I've ever seen in a town, city, or county owned system. But again, I think it is simply because there is a plethora of playgrounds in HOA parks. And it does not necessarily make a lot of sense for the town to go crazy with regards to the development of playgrounds. However, there is opportunity, obviously, to expand upon this as well, and or create playgrounds at each location that are unique and provide a different experience. Tennis courts, again, a lot of overlap, but also there are tennis courts, I believe 6 or 7 of them in HOA parks as well. But the hub for tennis, obviously, is at El Conquistador. Outdoor swimming, great coverage with regards to the Aquatics Center and the community center. Splash pad associated with the Aquatic Center right now. Potential opportunities to add a splash pad that's publicly accessible in an existing park exists. If you were to do it, obviously, at Naranja, you would have the ability to increase coverage. But I think either way, whether it be at another park, you would still obviously provide a level of service that would provide better equity. And then indoor rec facilities, as mentioned, this is the community center. Opportunities to add to this exist primarily, based on what the town owns right now at Steam Pump Ranch. As we know, Steam Pump Ranch is more to the north and east of the community center, that part of town, not the orange area, but definitely south of Tangerine. Adding 4,000 to 5,000 square feet there would increase coverage. But again, these are very expensive propositions, as you know. Typically, the construction of any new facility, dependent upon what's in it, can run to somewhere between 300 and 500, maybe 600 square feet. So that kind of tees up the technical information. And so, as Christy mentioned, one of Town Council's plans or strategic goals is to develop concept plans that can be implemented and are realistic to do. So we have gone through the effort here of just providing what I would call a framework. Christy, I don't know if you want to jump in and address this once again, just to, for maybe some of the latecomers that didn't hear your initial presentation around why we're doing this as part of a master plan.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So if you weren't here for the very beginning, one of the Town Council strategic initiative goals, in addition to the community-wide needs assessment and master plan, was to also develop new conceptual site plans for Naranja Park, Riverfront Park, James D. Kriegh Park, the community center, and Steam Pump Ranch. And so that is actually the next step in our planning process. As mentioned earlier, oftentimes concept plans are not included in a master plan, but the uniqueness in terms of the desires of our council, we will be developing that. And as we go through the timeline a little later in this presentation, there will be quite an opportunity for community members to participate. So with that, Mike, if you want to maneuver through these next few slides, and then after that, we can get to community comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Appreciate that. So what we're going to present here is not the actual concept plans themselves, but what we are presenting is the framework that will go into the development of the concept plans. We're currently in the process of developing those. And not to jump ahead, but we are going to present draft concepts to the Park and Rec Advisory Board next week. But then we are going to take the draft concept plans, post them on the town's website, and provide the public, you all and others, to provide comments on the concept plans. The one thing I want to make sure that you recognize is that concept plans are just what they are. These are not meant to be construction documents. They're not meant to dial into the exact location for any landscape architect or engineers out there. They're meant to provide an overview and a snapshot of the possible potential best locations of amenities within any existing park, and also to understand the functionality and the relationship between amenities so that they're compatible. It's not meant to get into the granular level of detail of the size of a playground or the type of fencing that's going to go with athletic fields or the exact number of parking spots. That all comes later, but it's meant to provide a vision for how the parks can be reimagined to better meet community need, as well as obviously the level of service information that we went through, and provide better equitable accessibility to the community as a whole. So the concept plans are for these 5 locations: the community center, including an update of the floor plan of the existing community center. So from a community center's perspective, we will look both inside and outside. I think one of the key elements that anybody could attest to with regards to the community center is going to be parking. Naranja Park, Riverfront, Kriegh, and Steam Pump Ranch. So the community center, this is just an overview of it. It does not obviously capture all of the acreage associated with the golf course. However, you can see that here's the parking, here's the building, here's the pool, here's the pickleball courts, and here is the tennis courts. So what are we thinking with regards to the community center? Replacing tennis courts and irrigation throughout the site. Reconfiguring the parking lot to increase the number of spaces. If we're going to think about redoing the community center indoors and potentially increasing its usage, we need to be exceptionally mindful of the parking that's available to service not just the community center, but of course the golf courses as well. And then replace and upgrade the pool deck and the pump room equipment. Again, this is pretty basic stuff, but what you see here is improvements to an experience, creating support facilities that are necessary to drive the community center renovation and increase its utilization, and then some really nuts and bolts stuff associated with the pool deck and the pump room. Riverfront Park, again, parking lots. This is primarily, I think we can all kind of agree, just simply based on the acreage, that there's a couple of diamond athletic fields, a couple of multi-purpose athletic fields, and then some smaller amenities such as tennis courts, basketball courts, ramadas, and so on and so forth. So what are we thinking here? Some of this is very nuts and bolts. Some of it is energy efficiency, environmental efficiency, and some of it is experience related. So replacing fencing, resurfacing courts, refurbishing playgrounds, improving irrigation, repair roofs. All of this ties to what we've talked about before, that anything that you build, nothing lasts forever. And so there is some life cycle replacement that's necessary at each of these parks that needs to be considered as we think about updating concept plans. Upgrading the amphitheater and upgrading field lights to LED, adding a splash pad and adding a dog park, converting the rectangular fields to diamond fields. So why would we do that? The idea is to understand that we have a lot of youth sport organizations that are operating and running leagues out of these fields. It's much easier for them to operate out of 1 or 2 sites as opposed to being spread out across the community as a whole, simply because their volunteer base is what it is. It makes it easier to manage. It makes it easier to communicate. It's also great for parents that have kids at different levels in terms of age. You want to be able to know that you're going to play soccer here or you're going to play baseball there, as opposed to always potentially having to divide and conquer your family because kids of different ages are playing the same kind of sport at different locations at the same time. Converting tennis court to basketball courts. That tennis court has been in existence long before the tennis courts existed within the town's inventory at El Conquistador. That is the hub for tennis, and we'd love to focus it there. The basketball court is heavily used at this park. And as noted previously, the town has very few of those. And then, of course, more life cycle replacement around restrooms and concession stands. Kriegh Park. This is a park that is exceptionally probably disjointed at best. Even if you look at just parking, that you can't get from one end of the park to the other contiguously in a vehicle. So that is certainly something that we'll look at. We know that this playground is well beyond its useful life and really needs to be redeveloped. So those are just some highlights. This here is obviously the Aquatic Center, and the associated parking with that is not great as well. So let's look at what we're thinking here. As I mentioned, replacing that playground, it's at a very critical stage. It's well beyond its useful life and potentially create safety issues for users. Better connectivity, as I mentioned, between parking areas, a new adventure play area, and the relocation of a dog park. Demolishing the unused or very lightly used racquetball courts and converting those to basketball courts. Upgrading the memorial garden area and repairing irrigation there and throughout the site. New pump room for the aquatic center. It's a lot of water, and you need a strong new pump room to not only operate and keep the water quality at high quality, but also to create energy efficiency as well. And then it's enhancing the aesthetics of the pool area. And I think what we mean by this is when you drive into, I'll go back, but when you drive into the park adjacent to the pool area, this is the pool area is well up on a hill. And the quote unquote curb appeal to this aquatic center is very much lacking, especially compared to the gem of the aquatic center once you get into it. So the idea is to present the aquatic center the way it should be presented, which is to understand that it's there and that it's a gem, and not feel as if it's surrounded by a bunch of neglected landscaping that doesn't do it justice at its front door. So Naranja Park, this is a lot of acreage, 213 acres of it, and very little of it has been developed. You do have dog park area, you've got a building smack dab in the middle, maintenance area, which is not necessarily completely inaccessible to the public. You do have your archery range, and then of course you do have some trail systems. But as you know, this park certainly has what I would call some edges and elevation to it. And that is going to be a focus of creating a not just a great experience, but a need to do an exceptional experience here. You also have down here the drone model airplane area as well. So stabilizing erosion areas is absolutely critical. Considering adding a BMX and or skate park. Typically you have one of these for every 50,000 people in a community. I know that it's not a high amenity, a high need, but again, as I mentioned, just because it's not a high need doesn't mean that you don't do it. You just do it strategically. And I think it's important to recognize that a skate park actually did exist in this park previously. Adding rectangular fields, restrooms, sport courts, parking, walking paths, wayfinding elements, trails. This park, though it is classified as a regional park, certainly has an opportunity on its edges to really serve as open space and trails and conservation areas as well. This is what good regional parks do. It's not just about athletic fields or active amenities. It figures out ways to create more passive amenities associated with it as well. Delineation of the maintenance area, as I mentioned, increasing the buffer between the park and adjacent homes, but also, and this ties back to connectivity analysis, strengthening those connections to neighboring communities and schools so that people can actually walk to this park if you live close to it. Right now, not so much, and or not very safely, simply because of some of the erosion areas. And then lastly, Steam Pump Ranch. This is very much a historical park. And so what we do here certainly has to be rooted within its historical context. And so these are the things that we're thinking for Steam Pump Ranch. Updating the buildings within the historic core. This is critical. We need to save those buildings. Otherwise, I guess you're not necessarily doing what the purchase of this park or the acquisition of this park was intended, which is to be a historical reflection of the area. Providing upgraded performance area. This ties to special events and the need for amphitheater areas. Upgrading, obviously, basic electrical and plumbing. Relocating the farmers market to the panhandle portion of the site. And then, of course, replacing existing farmers market structures, potentially with some indoor outdoor space that is more conducive to a quality city market or farmers market. All right, so our next steps now through April, as we just went through, we're going to present concept plans next week to PRAB. We are going to finalize that connectivity analysis, which speaks to the need for trails and the associated land necessary to carry the trails, Greenbelt Trail corridors. Develop a capital improvement plan. And this is where the money starts to this is where the rubber starts to meet the road, right? This is about how much all of this will cost. But then, of course, identifying funding and revenue strategies that support the capital improvement plan. As mentioned previously, one of the key drivers for developing level of service is what you can actually afford to implement, but also what you can actually afford to manage and maintain. And so we need to make sure that whatever recommendations we make on the capital improvement plan side and the dollars associated with it, that you can actually fund it and implement it, but also that the town can manage and maintain it at a high quality. And then, of course, the strategic action plan, which prioritizes all of the recommendations, and then a final master plan document development. So what does this look like for you all and your opportunities to connect? What we're showing here is when we will be making, because we're in a pandemic, when we'll be making Zoom presentations, to whom we will be making the Zoom presentations, whether that be you all, the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, or Town Council, and then what we will be covering at each one of these. So I don't expect you all to, if you want to hit print screen on your computer right now, you can do that, but this will be posted on the project website and of course on the town's calendar, as well as the town's website. So the couple of things I wanted to point out that are upcoming for you all. The PRAB meeting, Parks and Rec Advisory Board meeting, is next week. And that is where we will present draft concepts. However, as we have mentioned, we are going to post these draft concepts to the discuss page on the Town of Oro Valley's webpage. They're not going to be posted to the project website for comment. They will be posted on the Town of Oro Valley's webpage. However, if you do end up at the project website mistakenly, we will provide a direct link to the town's website where you can view these plans and provide your comments. You will have the opportunity to do that November 18th through December 18th. And so you have a full month. We recognize that Thanksgiving is in there. We recognize we are entering the holiday season. We had originally thought a couple of weeks would be fine, but then when we started to take those variables into consideration, we felt to give you the opportunity to live life through the holiday season and not be beholden to a very small comment period window. So that will be for an entire month. And then we will take all of your comments. We will take the PRAB's comments, Parks and Rec Advisory Board members' comments, and we will sift through them. All comments obviously have to be, put within the context of the land and the opportunities that exist for improvements. But we will do our very best to sift through those and reflect your comments and the PRAB's comments in the final concept plans. We are going to present those back to you in this virtual community meeting setup on January 7th. And then from there, we will get moving. We will have the connectivity analysis wrapped up with presentation to the PRAB and the concept plans. And then, of course, how much all of this is going to cost on the 19th of January. And then we'll kind of take it from there all the way through adoption on April 7th. So again, the next really kind of key 3 steps over the next couple of months for you all is the PRAB meeting. That is something that you can view via Zoom. Community input for the concept plans for a month from November 18th to December 18th. And then, of course, a virtual community meeting to present the final concept plans to you all on January 7th. All right, now you've had enough time to hear from me. Let's hear from you all. I'll turn it back over to Brandon, and he will take it from here.
All right, thanks, Mike. So as mentioned earlier by Christy and right now by Mike, this is a public meeting, so we definitely want to hear from you all as public participants. So just a reminder on how to do that via Zoom. I see a few people have their hand raised already, but yes, that is the correct way to do it. You can click on your participants icon and there should be the ability to raise your hand. That puts you in the queue. So I'll keep an eye on that queue and I'll announce who is up first and who is up next so we can keep this moving in a timely manner. Just a reminder, I think there's a couple people calling. So if you are calling in via the telephone, you can press *9 and that will raise your hand and I'll be able to see you. Keep in mind when it comes time to call on you guys that are calling in by phone, I can't see anything besides your telephone number. So that's how I will have to identify you. So with that, Christy, are you ready for public comment?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. And sometimes there's not last names put here, so I'm just going to have to wing it. So first, it looks like we have Michael, no last name. Michael, I'll go ahead and unmute you and get you set up. Just a reminder, we want to be mindful of time, so please limit your comments as much as possible so we can get through everybody. If there's still time at the end, I'm sure we can cycle back through if there's more comment.
Hi, thank you for giving us some time to provide our comments. My name is Michael Bilodeau. Most of you probably know me from my involvement with Preserve Soso, but tonight I'm here as I'm speaking as a resident of Oro Valley. The stated goal of the parks assessment was to identify the town's current and future recreation needs for equitable distribution of recreational facilities. These aren't my words, these come right from the assessment's executive summary. And the proposals presented tonight don't meet those goals. The parks assessment identified 13 high priority needs outside of upgrading trails in Naranja Park and creating a performance area in Steam Pump Ranch. None of these are addressed. Oddly, the few new amenities being proposed, like a BMX skate park, more basketball courts, and a pickleball court all are low on the priority list. I'm glad to hear, as Christy said, that there is some consideration of parks and trails north and that they'll eventually be incorporated in a master plan. But I still don't get this fact that we go from an assessment to get the needs of the community. We pretty much ignore them all and we jump directly into conceptual plans that include a lot of low priority needs, or at least low medium priority. The master plan should focus on the priorities of the community, not on national trends. That's why we do these efforts to go in and ask people. And Mike, as you sort of pointed out, you got very consistent feedback in all of the methods that you went out to the community, the statistically valid surveys, the meeting in communities. And so I think there's some pretty good data behind this, that it's not just a one-off. These are things that the community really needs. And driving to Tucson or Marana or Catalina State Park, those are some commitments. We should not have to go that far to get the amenities we need. The other thing I'd like to bring up is the equity maps clearly show that the recreational facilities are not equally distributed. 40% of the town's population lives north of Tangerine, where there's only one town facility. And as you mentioned, not very many amenities in that at all. The proposed fix that seems the conceptual plans make is to make no investment north of Tangerine. We are Oro Valley's residents, all 40% that are in Sun City and Rancho Vistoso. Our tax revenue is collected and given to the town, not to our HOAs. So our HOAs don't have that money to make those investments. Multiple times we've heard the town say that they envision Rancho Vistoso as being a self-sufficient community. This comes from the PAD documentation created in the late 1980s. And do you want to know what else these PAD documents say? It says that our communities should be 50% open space. They describe a bicycle pedestrian path that connects all of these communities, paid for by developers. This didn't happen. This is why these needs are there, the trails and the natural surfaces, because the town did not hold the developers to provide these amenities for us. We have playgrounds, we have basketball courts, and we have picnic tables. We don't have any of the other amenities that are listed there. Some communities have pools that they pay for themselves, but mine doesn't. I don't have access to a pool. The community I live in is made up of about 160 homes. We have a mini park. You have it listed as a neighborhood park. It has 2 picnic tables. That's it. That's it. I have to walk 30 to 40 minutes to get to any kind of amenity, and that is an HOA park. It's a very nice park, but that's not reasonable. I shouldn't have to walk 30 to 40 minutes. I cannot walk to any town facility. I have to get in my car. Heaven forbid, if you don't have a vehicle, there is no public transportation to get you there. You have no access to anything. And you can really see it in your equity maps, the bubbles. They all go over top of each other on the center of town. I wish you would do the equity maps for the HOAs. On playgrounds and basketball courts, we look not too bad, but multiple times you made the comment, there is good coverage in Oro Valley. For most things, especially the high priority items, that's not true. There is not good coverage. And I'm glad to see that there are some changes that are being considered here, that this is an early stage, but I haven't really seen a master plan. I've seen the needs assessment. Now I'm seeing conceptual plans for existing facilities, and basically just, if it's in the orange area, you're out of luck. Very frustrating. I'm hoping to see some of these issues addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to go ahead and mute you, turn your video off. We'll move on.
Hey,
It looks like
Brandon?
Steve. Oh, yeah, sorry.
And just real quick, I just would like to acknowledge Michael's comments and thank him for participating. As part of one of the things that Mike said, not Michael, in terms of the equity mapping. Uh-oh, we're losing something here on the screen. It looks strange to me. if we can just go back to the people, that would be great.
Sure.
Is that the connectivity analysis will really take a deep dive into the existing system and certainly identify those missing gaps. And, you know, and as I mentioned early on, is that while what we see today is what has been done in the past, and the goal is to plan better in the future. And so identifying some of those missed opportunities to make those trail connections, lean in a little harder with the when those private properties are becoming developed, to really emphasize these community needs, definitely will be a priority, and it'll be articulated when the final plan is adopted or presented, excuse me. So thank you.
Thank you,
We can go
Christy.
to Stephen next, I think.
Yeah, so we'll have Stephen next, and then following him, it looks like Tom. So we'll get you all set up here. Stephen.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great, great. So my name is Dr. Stephen Panabianco, and I'm a medical physician and homeowner in the Sienna development in Oro Valley. To start with, Christy and Mike, thank you for your presentations. I learned a great deal, and I appreciate how you guys value neighborhood parks. So I just have a short statement I'd like to share. In response to the Master Parks and Recreation study, I share the viewpoint with many others that it should be revised to include high quality park amenities for the Oro Valley taxpayers who live in Rancho Vistoso. I remain a strong advocate for maximizing community open space for the overall health of the community as a physician and a member of the community. And further, I hold the position that the community of Sienna and other adjacent Oro Valley communities should likewise benefit from Oro Valley Town Council support to help transition the adjacent prior golf course property into open space for community use. In the past several pandemic months, and it's certainly been a new world for all of us, many people have enjoyed the health benefits of walking and biking along that adjacent property's paved pathways. And that acreage has significant capacity for future needed pandemic appropriate endeavors, including beyond biking and walking, while preserving the incredible natural beauty of the area. Additionally, my understanding is that Sienna has been contributing tax dollars for park space for years without the benefit of a park within its development. Many of us chose to be property tax contributing members of Oro Valley in part due to the adjacent open space. And moving forward, Oro Valley Town Council support would be appreciated to help transition that adjacent property for such a purpose. Such space is easily justifiable from a community health standpoint pre-pandemic, and more so during a pandemic era that which we reside. And in terms of some of the points that were raised in this discussion today, as conveyed today, there's significant growth that's pending. We feel it every day with the volume of traffic on our roads, and there's limited land and space. So that highlights the very unique opportunity, the community valued opportunity to transition the adjacent acreage to Sienna for community health needs. You can't undevelop once development has manifested. So I would hope that you give consideration to these thoughts.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Stephen. All right. 1 second. Looks like we have Tom up and then Rosa after that. Tom, I'll go ahead and get you set up here. You should be good to go, Tom, whenever you're ready.
Okay, great, thanks. So my biggest concern here is that this is a plan that's been put together that just summarily dismissed residents north of Tangerine, and saying now that, well, we're going to consider those needs is really just lip service, does not mean that the plan's going to include anything for us right now, because we're not seeing anything. As you build out these capital improvement plans and spending plans, and all of those move forward, the residents still feel like they've been totally left out on purpose. And that is, I don't know, just outrage. We do not appreciate that at all. That mapping that's been done and coloring an area orange does not mean that you're meeting the needs of the residents. How many surveys of the residents included whether or not their needs are being met according to the survey of what the needs were? How many of the basketball courts were not just counted, but evaluated as to whether or not they really meet a need? The playgrounds, a lot of the playing done is digging in the sand. There's not a lot of amenities there for the children to stay engaged. I've spent time in these parks, and I've spent time with children in these parks, and I understand that they serve somewhat of a need, but having a picnic table and some sand with a swing set does not mean that needs are being met. And I think that more time should have been spent, if you're counting those, as meeting the needs of the residents of Oro Valley. So consider that as we move forward with this master plan that is not just a one-year plan, but a strategic plan for the town, a multi-year plan that should include the needs of everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, next up we have Rosa.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I'm Rosa Daly. I also live in the Sienna neighborhood in Rancho Vistoso. And I don't want to go over a lot of what was already said, because I completely agree with the statements that Michael Bilodeau, Steve Pambianco, and Tom Stegman have made. They all touched on some very, very important points. I just want to give you some perspective here. I have been involved with trying to transition this Vistoso property for 2.5 years. And one thing that I want to point out is that it is often, the property north of Tangerine is often referred to as within the purview of the HOA. And we often talk about the pad, and Michael made some eloquent comments about the pad. But let's just understand something about the way Rancho Vistoso came about. There were a lot of mistakes made. And one of them is that 187.6 acres of that golf course are not recorded in the HOA. They are not part of the HOA. They are the responsibility right now of the town of Oro Valley. And the entire property, the entire 202 acres of open space, presents an amazing opportunity within the context of a master plan. I mean, I can't imagine that we would not at least address the fact that Rancho Vistoso residents pay twice. They pay their HOA dues, which maintains the pocket parks and the neighborhood parks, and then we pay our sales tax dollars. So what this is really about is the equity of the tax base in Oro Valley and where those tax dollars are spent. And if people in Rancho Vistoso contribute to the Parks and Rec's budget, they should receive equal attention when it comes to high quality parks that are not, a picnic table and some grass that probably shouldn't even be watered. We're talking about They don't have to be the same types of parks. Maybe there are basketball courts in one area, or you put the ball fields in another, but we have this Vistoso property that would make an excellent conservation area and accessible, as Steve said, to people, even though it's private property, it's heavily used right now by people to bike, to push strollers, because it's a unique park amenity. So I just want to echo what everyone else said, and said that it was a real gut punch to see the way this thing came out after we all participated in good faith. And I really think you need to consider that we want to be a part of Oro Valley, but we want to be a full partner like every other resident and every other community. And we want to make sure that you hear us now, because this is the time to revise the plan and to make sure that we look at what's north of Tangerine. When you annex property, people always talk about Oro Valley dying if it doesn't annex and annex and annex. Well, when you annex, you don't just provide police service. You got to provide the high quality amenities as well. And parks and recs and the programming that you can get at, south of Tangerine that we don't have north of Tangerine, all of that is important. So thank you for hearing my comments.
Thank you, Rosa.
Okay, next up we have Patricia, and then after that it'll be Terry. You should be good to go, Patricia.
Thank you very much for having this opportunity, Christy, to give our opinions. I echo what everybody else has said, but I have a little story. When we moved to Oro Valley, one of my acquaintances said to me, "Oh, you moved to Oro Valley. Where'd you move?" And I said, "Well, we moved to Center Point. That's north, way north in La Cañada ends." And she said, "Oh, I didn't know that was part of Oro Valley." I rest my case. We are not considered part of this town, even though we're 40% of the population. We pay taxes twice, as Rosa said, and we have no real park facilities in our community. We don't begrudge the fact that you need to spend money on existing parks, but couldn't you come up with a plan that's just not so focused on basketball courts and everything? In January, I partly represented Preserve Vistoso, and I said, "I'm a senior. There aren't many places where I can go walking." I beg to differ with you on Catalina State Park. That is not my idea of a comfortable walk. 50% of the population, or close to it, in Oro Valley are seniors. I hear not one thing mentioned about seniors in this park planning. Maybe I didn't hear it right, but I think that is an oversight that should be addressed. And Rancho Vistoso has been part of Oro Valley since 1987. And the fact that the town of Oro Valley gave all the planning for parks and recreational areas over to the developer community, well, what do you think happened? Of course, what happened? We did not get the good end of the stick, so to speak. So it's not been fair. It's like you need a passport to go across Tangerine to your home, because we're not treated the same as if we were members of the area in the center of town. The other thing is, and excuse me for picking on you, Mr. Svets, but when you were talking about the Aquatics Center and you said, "Oh, when people drive up there, it's an eyesore. It doesn't have curb appeal." Well, my goodness, we have other things to consider besides curb appeal at the Aquatics Center, I think. I really appreciate the fact that Oro Valley is the kind of town that listens to its community, but I'm not sure that Rancho Vistoso has been on the radar until just recently. And we don't need more archery fields and stuff like that. So I appreciate the fact that you've given us a chance to express our opinions. we've discussed the pad. That's ridiculous again. So, but thank you for letting us have the time to speak.
Thank you, Patricia. It's good to see you again.
Yes, thanks, Christy.
All right, 1 second. All right, Terry, you're up next. And after Terry, we have Richard.
Am I muted right now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, it still showed that on my screen. I'm sorry. First of all, to Christy and Mike, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for your presentation this evening. But and first of all, and instead of just coattailing on and just echoing everything that I believe Michael Bilodeau, Tom Stegman, I think Rosa Daly, Pat Sturman, and I'm sure there was others, regarding all the comments that they made. I'll just point out the obvious first. And I think it's also the reason there is you probably set a record for the number of participants on a Parks and Rec board meeting. And for something like this, and I'll just point, as I said, I'll point out the obvious. It's because you totally
Terry, you're cutting out.
Terry, you still there? Let's see.
Brandon, it looks like he lost connection. Maybe, hey, Terry, if you can hear us, we're gonna move on to the next person. If you can either dial back in or relog on, and then we'll come back to you once your mic goes live again. Did that? Oh,
All right. So, yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, I think yeah, no problem. I think he just fell off to log back on. So in the meantime, we'll move on to Richard. Richard, I'll go ahead and unmute you. After Richard, we have Hal. Whenever you're ready, Richard, you should be good to go.
Hi, my name is Rich Molnar. I live in the Sienna development in Rancho Vistoso. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. I really have to echo the sentiments that everyone else has mentioned, and in the interest of time, I'll be brief, but I just have to say, I believe that the residents of Rancho Vistoso, who again make up 40% of the population of Oro Valley, are really being shortchanged in this study big time. And I wonder if that's intentional. As it relates to the golf course, the former Vistoso golf course really was designed to be recreational open space. And I think the town should ensure that it remains so for the benefit of everyone. As Pat mentioned, Catalina State Park, there's thousands of acres of walking trails and paths and everything, but they're not paved walking paths that are accessible by everybody. And that's a big deal. I guess lastly, everybody said what I was going to say, but I think spending the money that I paid in taxes to commission a study just to tell me that I live in an area that's not going to be considered for amenities of any kind is just really a big insult to me and all the other Rancho Vistoso homeowners that I've spoken to. I really think that's unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Richard.
Oops, I was muted. All right, next we have Hal. Hal, you should be good to go whenever you're ready.
Yes. Good evening. Thank you for conducting this outreach. First of all, I should introduce myself. I'm a member of the Oro Valley Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm a retired planner, and I moved here from Oregon about a little over 2 years ago. Before I retired, my last job was as planning director for a large park and recreation district in the Portland area. And I was there for several years. At the start of my tenure there, the district succeeded, and this was going into the Great Recession, so it was a close vote, but they succeeded in passing a $100 million bond measure based on property tax revenues for a whole range of improvements in the park district. And it's describing for the voters what they're going to be buying with their property tax contribution. The park district spent a lot of time surveying people and asking what they wanted. They made a lot of adjustments to the improvements list. And again, we're talking about capital improvements, not programs so much. And they basically tried to do what people wanted. If the survey showed they didn't want something, they took it off the list. And I'm afraid, based on what I'm hearing tonight, that you're headed in a direction where you're not going to get support if you go to the voters for a capital measure to pay for improvements. I think you need to readjust. What the surveys consistently have shown is that people want trails and pathways, multi-use pathways. And you're going to do a connectivity study here soon. Boy, I hope something results from that, because if you don't really put more emphasis on that, I think you're going to be in trouble. So my advice is maybe step back a bit and take a look at where you're going, because I don't live in Rancho Vistoso. I live toward the southern end of the town. But I think you need to take a look at what people want as opposed to what you think they should have. I think you're headed in the wrong direction. I do have a question, though, that came to mind as I was listening to this. And I believe I read in the Explorer a couple of months ago that the Rooney family was interested in donating to the town some property they own on the east side of Oracle Road. Can you enlighten us as to where that is, or if that is true, that's maybe happening?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Hal, for your comments. Also for serving on our P&Z board. That's a mighty task. That's a big, busy board. So with regard to your comment, your question about land donation from the Rooney family. So I'm sure everybody here knows where the Target shopping center is. That's like, probably every woman's point of reference in Oro Valley. But so there's an intersection there on Oracle and Push Ridge View, and it dead ends going east. And so if you imagine going east, kind of over that hillside, there's approximately, I don't know the total number, approximately 100 acres in that area. Pretty rugged, natural open space in that area, and it was donated to the town of Oro Valley a few months ago. I don't have all of that information at my fingertips, but yes, indeed, that was. I do not believe that there is a plan in place in terms of what the use of that space is going to be. The new town council will have their strategic planning, or 2-year strategic planning efforts early next year. And that may be an opportunity to address that. It may be premature, I don't know. But to answer your question, we did acquire a little over 100 acres.
So will that be factored into the planning process you're engaged in now?
At this point, it wouldn't, but once the vision of that space is identified, if open space conservation trails is going to be one of the amenities within there, we would absolutely work through another sort of community process and through our Park and Recreation Advisory Board, and identify how that makes sense associated with what our current system has. So we would be able to roll that into the project. So that would go with any, possible future land acquisition. How does that make sense into our system? And then we would plan that out and then amend the master plan to include that recreation amenity.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Christy, if I could add to this, I think the one thing I just want to be perfectly clear on, when we went through the level of service, one of the things that I mentioned was the fact that we don't put a number on Greenbelt Trail corridor acreage, and we don't put a number on open space conservation area. And there's a reason for that. The simple reason is the fact that it's not about acreage, it's about opportunity, and it's about connectivity. And so, though there's not a stated goal with regards to open space acquisition in terms of acreage, I think it's important to recognize that the community has very much spoken. And so, to Mr. Bergsma's comments, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm a recovering Parks and Recreation director. Parks and Recreation are meant to be utilized and to meet the highest needs of the community. But that said, I think, it's simply to recognize that trails and open space and conservation areas is paramount to your community. And it is why we added scope language to incorporate the connectivity analysis, to understand how we can create a connected paved trail system that advances on meeting the needs of the community. With regards to open space and natural area, though we're not necessarily putting a number on it, what we cannot do in a technical master plan document is identify private property that is not available for sale to purchase. However, if those opportunities do arise and do exist, we absolutely will make the statement in the master plan that says, in order to meet your community's needs, acquisition of open space and conservation area as the opportunity arises should be strongly considered. The challenge that I think we always have when we do a park system master plan is identifying pieces of property that are, number one, actually for sale by the town, and or what we cannot do, and I will repeat this, we cannot make a statement about purchasing land that either is not zoned to be open space and or conservation area, or is held privately. It's just not good planning business from a town's perspective. So I think a fair statement with regards to open space and trails is that the community has spoken, and when these opportunities do arise in the community, and they will, that the town should think very, very strongly about preserving that space as open space, as opposed to potentially rezoning it in such a way that would increase development. It's always a balancing act, but I think it's important to recognize that we recognize the nuances of land acquisition, and you legally just cannot speak to the acquisition of somebody else's property, especially if it is not zoned that way.
Thank you, Mike. Good clarification.
All right, looks like Terry's back on board. So Terry, you're up next. I'm going to head unmute you. You should be good to go.
Great. Hey, first of all, I want to sincerely apologize. My wife and I are traveling right now, and we do not have very good service. So I sincerely apologize to everyone that's on the call right now. I'll just, instead of going and just reiterating what everyone else has already said, I'm not sure where I got cut off, but I'll even cut everything a lot shorter. I'll just say this, and I'm just to point out the obvious, and I believe, and I'm pretty confident in saying this, that by far, I think the reason that you have this many participants in this meeting and hearing their comments that you have is because everyone feels in this long-term master plan, just as Mike Bilodeau mentioned right at the outset, was you are totally missing the high priority needs that the residents of Oro Valley were very clearly in favor of. So all these comments and everything, and whether they're on this meeting, they come to you on the Ask OV, directly via email, it's basically all self-inflicted. When you don't do what the residents are requesting, this is the result of it. Second point, and I believe this is now the third presentation that I've listened to from Pros Consulting, and on regarding the HOA parks. The majority of all those, I shouldn't say that, a lot of them are in gated communities. The quote public does not have access to those, regardless of what's in there. The same is somewhat true with both the community center and the aquatic center. Those are both fee-based facilities. That has never been mentioned once. The residents of Oro Valley just can't walk in and just use the aquatic center. It doesn't happen. They have to pay for that, to do that. The same thing with the community center. If I want to go play pickleball, I need to pay for it. None of that has ever been mentioned. Thank you for your time. That's it for me.
Thank you, Terry, and safe travels to you and your wife.
All right, let's see here. Looks like next we have John, and after John we have Dave. John, I'm going to unmute you and you should be good to go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay, perfect. Again, don't want to reiterate what everybody else said, but make a couple of points. I think the reason why you're getting this much feedback on a parks meeting is because I think it's very clear from all that's been happening over the last year that the residents of Vistoso want the open space. They've been in good faith negotiating with a private company for open space. And then they see a 10-year plan from the city that doesn't address any of their needs that was expressed. So you can hear from the tone of people's voices when they address the group that it doesn't seem like there is enough action either via this committee or the study or the folks on our city council to really understand the desire for the folks up here to have that open space, and then to not see a mention of open space or parks on a plan that's going to be developed for 10 to 15 years. You can see how everybody could be a little bit dubious of what we have in store for us up here. And I won't, the 40% of the population, and to not have any of that in a 15-year plan, and then not have any maybe backing or pushing to help develop some open space when it comes available is a real somebody said a punch in the gut for the residents up here. So that was my comments. And so the question would be, when you say that there's no planned development of parks up here north of Tangerine, does that mean that you have no plans for the next 10 years to develop parks north of Tangerine? And I'll listen to my answer.
John, thank you. To answer your question, that's not what that means. The planned area development was part of the planned area development. That was the plan that was developed many years ago in the 80s in terms of how parks would be built in PADs as a complement to general public park use. But to your question in terms of parks north of Tangerine, as mentioned early on in the meeting, there's specifically with regard to the former golf course, we have heard loud and clear from the community what the community's desires are. But we also, as I said and as Mike said, cannot actively plan private property. But we will absolutely acknowledge the community's desire for open space trail systems, and that if there becomes an opportunity for the town of Oro Valley to acquire such type of space, then that language will be written in the master plan. And not just in terms of open space trails, but we will also include that in terms of community parks. So if there becomes such a time that we have an opportunity to either acquire property or partner with an HOA or partner with a school, so that way we can make larger public spaces north of Tangerine, we will definitely look into that as well. And that will be acknowledged in the plan in terms of opportunistic for expansion of our existing system.
All right, thanks, Christy. Looks like we have another hand raised. Dave, you are up next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I think the reason that you're hearing from a lot of upset people north of Tangerine is, to use somebody else's expression, it was a real punch in the gut when Romspen refused a reasonable offer from the Conservation Fund to purchase the property, the ex-golf course property. It makes everybody wonder, why was Romspen feeling encouraged to turn a good offer down? Do they feel that they can go ahead and get zoning accomplished, rezoning accomplished? And if so, why would they be encouraged to think like that strategically? I know it's difficult, but if the town could take more of an open stance that they're going to support people north of Tangerine to keep that property as open space, maybe, Romspen would become more reasonable and work out a deal to sell it to the Conservation Fund. Preserve Vistoso has raised a considerable amount of money towards that process. So there's no reason it can't happen. You just have to wonder why Romspen feels that they can hold off like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
All right, next we have Michael. I believe it's the same Michael again. Let's see here. Michael, you should be ready to go.
Thank you. So some of the questions from the community prompted a question I had forgotten to ask. So a lot of the amenities that have been mentioned do require fees for people to access. And I was quite surprised to see that the acreage, according to the Pros Consulting report, the number of acres per resident is above average. When you're counting the acreage, is that including like the town's golf courses and areas that do require fees? Is that pretty typical? Or is all that special use, like the 320 acres of special use was the thing I was wondering about, because we have some statistics sort of showing the amount of public space is pretty low in Oro Valley. And so that statistic surprised me. Wasn't sure, Mike, if you had.
Yes. So, it is not uncommon for park and recreation systems across the country to have acreage that is for in essence, like golf courses that are pay to play. It is a part of the public park system. I think that there are very few communities across this country, suburban, communities that do that if they have recreation centers that they are not typical pay to play. Same thing associated with golf courses and swimming pools. The costs obviously are something that was not mentioned in this plan, but we are doing a cost user fee analysis as part of this plan as well. So I was remiss in not mentioning that as part of this plan, but that is going to be incorporated and shared with the community as well. But all publicly owned land associated with the public park system is typically counted as part of acreage. And why we kind of separate out what we call developed versus undeveloped. So all those things that were above the bar are developed property. Open space, the only reason that we keep that separate is simply because of not trying to pigeonhole a community such as yourselves that has a desire for open space and conservation land to a number, meaning that if the opportunity arises, you absolutely should take advantage and match the community's needs with regards to acquiring that. The hardest part about trying to pinpoint a open space number is kind of what I said earlier, is that most open space in a community is privately held. It's also potentially zoned in a specific way that it's not easily converted to open space. There are a lot of things that you have to work within, one being the town's general plan in and of itself, and the planning and zoning associated with land use. Does that mean all of that stuff is locked in granite and can never be changed? Absolutely not. That's why we do these plans, to help inform and make decisions about future land use. But that I think to answer your one very specific question, yes, all publicly owned land does work its way into what we would call a level of service acreage, calculation. You can back that out and you can say, here's what the community park and neighborhood parks are. And that's why we show those individually as well in terms of level of service. A lot of communities across this country, simply because of land use requirements and or their inability to acquire land, are in many cases somewhere between 3 and 7 acres per thousand. And that includes, in some cases, golf courses. That includes, in some cases, special use parks. I think one of the opportunities that the community has, and I fully recognize that. I fully recognize the accessibility issue, and I think that's why the connectivity analysis is being done, to really understand what that walk to that you mentioned early on, Michael, is in the community, and to try and reduce that as much as possible. The National Recreation and Park Association Trust for Public Lands has a goal, an overarching goal, to try and make parks within a 10-minute walk. They don't define, however, they don't define what that park space is. They don't say it's 10 minutes to a community park. They don't say it's 10 minutes to a neighborhood park. It could be a mini park. And I'm just going to be brutally honest, as a recovering Parks and Recreation director and a park professional. I don't think, this is not meant, in any way, shape, or form as a reflection of the town of Oro Valley, but parks across this country, in many cases, communities have allowed the development community to build what, they felt was right, as opposed to having a plan that kind of dictates it. One of the ways that we're shortly trying to rectify this through this plan is to not allow mini parks to be developed in the future. We want larger neighborhood parks that provide more experiences that help meet your community's needs, as opposed to a piece of land that, in essence, in some cases, the development community just chose to turn into a park because it wasn't quote unquote developable or profitable. And so we see that a lot. And The unfortunate part, I think, as Christy mentioned, is and somebody else mentioned, is as soon as something becomes developed, it makes it really, really hard to undo that. In other words, you just don't have the opportunity to acquire land. And so that's part of, I think that's the rub with the Rancho Vistoso golf course. It seems like a wonderful opportunity. And I don't, as a park professional and sitting in Christie's shoes, I wouldn't disagree with that. But there are unfortunately things that we have to work through in order to make that happen.
Sorry, I was muted. Had a question on the connectivity plan. When I hear that word, it sounds like connecting existing trails, which, as you heard, one of the problems is we have no trails to connect to up here. Is that what you mean by connectivity plan, or does the connectivity plan, could it go further to say adding trails to a neighborhood?
I'll be brutally honest, we are not scoped to take on what I would call a full-blown trails plan. But what we are trying to do is identify not just gaps in the existing system, but generally speaking, where there are gaps from a trails perspective as a whole. Are we going to get down into the nitty-gritty of identifying pieces of property that potentially could be converted to acquisition? Or one of the things that you can't do with parks, or you can do with parks, but it's much harder, is, as you know, when you're dealing with Rancho Vistoso, of trying to convert that into an easement, you have a better shot at creating easements that can carry trails. And so that's part of where we start to look at it from a connectivity analysis, is what are the gaps in the existing system? And that's first and foremost, because that's what exists right now. How can you make that whole? And then where are the gaps in connectivity as a whole? Getting back to kind of what you said early on about, I shouldn't have to walk 30 to 40 minutes to a park. You're absolutely right. And so I think those are the overarching goals of the connectivity analysis. But it's not, and I think it's really important to understand, we are not doing a full-blown trails master plan as part of the park system plan. I can rest assured that updating the city's trails bike plan and or creating a new one will certainly be a recommendation that comes out of this plan in order to actually meet some of the needs, the highest needs that are reflected in the needs assessment portion.
Thanks, Mike and Michael. We do have one more hand raised. I just want to keep the flow going. It looks like John, I think it's the same John again. So we'll go ahead and move to him.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Again, some of the questions that brought up, the statements that brought up allowed me to think and ask a couple of other questions. One, it seems like, and again, it's hard to separate this parks plan for the folks up here from that Rancho Vistoso golf course plan that was going through for the last year. So I apologize if I keep referring back to that, but so it sounds like the private property was indeed for sale, or at least the owners were entertaining the selling it for open space. And if that was the case, you in this parks plan would have recommended that the city would at least look into purchasing that parcel of land, because it sounds like that's what you've been saying for the last like half an hour, that it sounds like a good opportunity. It's open land. When they come available, those opportunities don't come along often, but when they do, one should really look into taking advantage of that. So it seems like it was for sale. It was a private property and was for sale. And would that be in the parks plan? Would you have recommended us doing something with that land? That's the first question. And then on accompany that with, I know you canvass the citizens, want to know how much of the developers, because up here north of Tangerine, there's a lot of housing development, and how much of the developers' needs were put into those parks plans in terms of the use of space.
So I'll address, I might defer to Christy on the first question. I am not completely sure that the land was publicly posted for sale. But I could be remiss on that. So Christy, I would defer to you to determine if the developer actually said this land is for sale, or if they were approached by the Conservation Fund to purchase the land. There's a big difference.
Right. Yeah. So it's been quite complicated for the last few years. And we are frankly walking a legal fine line here. What I would, in terms of the hypothetical, what we're saying is within the town of Oro Valley, if there is, and obviously there's a desire for open space and trails. If there is an opportunity for acquisition or partnership or cooperative use, then those are the items that's the language that will be included in the master plan, in the final master plan. We cannot identify a specific private location, but it's just simply, this is our statement. And our statement is this is a community desire. If it becomes available, there are a variety of negotiation tools where it might happen. And that's the way that we'll position it in the language in the plan. And then with the second piece, in terms of the development community, we've not specifically reached out to the development community for this. So, I mean, if there's a developer that lives in Oro Valley that participated as a community member, we recognize that as a community member, but we've not. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think technically speaking, most of the time, and I am not, as you know, one of the individuals mentioned, I am not a planning and zoning person per se. I know enough to be dangerous, but I think one of the things is simply to state that when you create a planned development area, there is typically what is called a development agreement that is associated with that specific planned development area. And that planned development agreement is negotiated by the town and the developer to meet very specific requirements. It can get down to where roads are. It can get down to, utilities. It gets down to parks. And so there's a difference between planned development areas and just residential areas. And those planned development areas typically come with a lot of boxes that need to be checked on behalf of the developer as determined in negotiations with the town, or a city or a county or a village. And so there's a difference between somebody building 10 homes somewhere versus somebody building what's called a planned development area. The planned development area comes with a very legally binding agreement. In some cases, it's a gated community. Some cases, it's a master planned community. But typically, those developments are enhanced above and beyond somebody building a small neighborhood of 10 or 35 lots. And parks are always a part of that conversation.
Thanks, Mike. We have one more hand raised, and it is a little bit after 8 o'clock. So I just want to remind, if you guys didn't hear me during my original spiel, you can click on the participants icon to raise your hand, or if you're calling in, it's *9, and we want to definitely make sure to give everybody a chance to speak, especially people that haven't spoken before. So, all right, this is a telephone number. Last 4 digits are 1368. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You should be good to go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, my name is Teresa Morrow, and we're Rancho Vistoso residents. And I guess after listening to everyone, I mean, I agree with all the comments that were made. I think the plan fails to address the needs of the Rancho Vistoso area in a nutshell. But just listening to some of these final conversations, is the plan going to be revised to incorporate the priorities that were identified in the survey? It feels like you all went through the motion to distribute a survey, and then the top priorities, like Michael Bilodeau and others said, weren't really incorporated. It was more of, go ahead and fill out the survey, but then you came forth with a report that was what, you know, you all as a consulting firm felt we needed to implement. So are you all going to go back and rework the plan and represent it so that we as the residents have a comfort level that we're really going to get what we need?
Well,
And
I
if so, what's the timeline on doing that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we are not, this is not the plan. Part of why we are doing this is to provide you an update on some technical information that is very much in draft form. Part of the reason for this community input opportunity is to hear your voice and understand where there are potential opportunities to enhance recommendations. At this point, we have not made any what I would call final recommendations. Everything is very much in draft form. I think the thing that is always somewhat challenging with regards to master plans is simply the fact that what you can speak to is you can speak to how you take care of and how you advance your existing property. And you can speak to, generally speaking, park acreage that you should acquire. However, the one thing that I will repeat is simply to state that we do not want to be beholden to a very specific number associated with natural area and open space conservation. We want to make that the highest priority in this master plan as a recommendation, so that as opportunities do arise, you know, regardless of the size of that acreage, it could be the size of Rancho Vistoso, but it could also be the size of, you know, it could be the size of like Riverfront Park. And I guess I'll put it in very specific terms. So if we did make a recommendation, and this is very hypothetical, and we are not going to do this, but if we made a recommendation that the town should acquire 100 acres of open space and natural area, however, you had the opportunity to acquire 250 acres, would you want to be beholden to that 100 number? And the answer is simply no, because the highest priority of the community dictates that you want to conserve and preserve as much open space and provide trails within that land as you possibly can. So we don't want the numbers to work against you. We want to create a goal that, you know, doesn't have a number to it, but fully recognizes the will of the community and the marching orders that you all have provided us, that simply says opportunities come up to acquire land that preserves open space and can create trails within it and provide some light touch recreational amenities. That is something that you absolutely should do. And that becomes a community value and an ethos, and hopefully works its way into what we would call, you know, a strategic goal, you know, for town council.
Thanks, Mike. Looks like we have another hand raised here. And we have two hands raised. So that'll be the final two for tonight, just for the sake of time. So Patricia, that you are next.
Thank you. I don't see my video up, but is it up?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, I just want to make a small point. You know, Mike, and I appreciate all the consulting work that you've done and how you're trying to help our community. But you're making planned area development sounding like some wonderful thing that Rancho Vistoso got involved in, when in fact it is, and it's often quoted by, it's sometimes quoted by town management as we're self-sufficient. But it envisioned trails and 51% of open space and a lot of other amenities, which most of us think we did not get. And you can say, well, maybe the towns failed to monitor this and give Rancho Vistoso, set of small HOA parks, which we pay for in addition to taxes, that maybe the town could have done a better job of monitoring the planned area development and what we got and what we were promised. And so that's my only additional comment.
Yeah, I think the only comment that I would have back is I think the evolution of public parks has, evolved immensely over the last 40 to 50 years. And I think one of the things that we're always hard pressed to try to figure out is how do you repurpose land that, number one, you don't own, but you recognize that there are potential deficiencies to as a public entity. So, that one of the individuals said early, it's kind of like once it's done, and that's the unfortunate challenge of it, unless a town were to go in and make a very sizable financial contribution in some way, shape, or form through, as Christy mentioned, partnerships that could potentially enhance the public park system within planned development areas. But that is, part of the challenge that you run into is you're in planned development areas in some cases, and to speak to Rancho Vistoso, you may have had a public park system or a park system based on what I would call 1980s standards. But it's maybe not necessarily up to the quote unquote 2020 to say 2030, 2040 standards. And that's the rub that you always run into when you're doing plans associated with this that are tied to very specific development agreements. But we will address that. Again, we cannot address, as Christy has mentioned several times, we cannot address parcels of land the town does not own directly, but we can create guiding principles and values tied to the community needs that provide as I mentioned, the town in a position to act upon those. That's the purpose of a plan, is to provide those kind of statements and recommendations, very similar to what you see typically in town general plans, or what are called comprehensive plans, that look beyond the boundaries of just parks and recreation.
Thanks, Mike. Looks like we have two more hands. We're going to call this at 8:30 just for the sake of time. So let's try and get through these last couple comments, and appreciate everybody's participation. So next up is, I believe, the same telephone number ending in 1368, excuse me. You should be unmuted.
Okay. Hi, it's Teresa Mara again. I had one additional question, and it's probably more appropriate for Christy, and I'm going to say even, with Mary Jacobs. So what are the next steps outside of this? Because we've made it known what our preferences are from a Rancho Vistoso standpoint. What are the next steps to address the former golf course piece of land timely? We've been dealing with it for 2.5 years. So what can you all do to move it forward with the town council? What are the next steps so we have some concrete action steps out of this? We've made it known what we want from the master plan, but everyone's, asked this question, and what are some concrete responses to this?
Teresa, my concrete answer is not going to be one that you want, because my answer is I don't know what the next steps are. I do know that there was an executive session this evening by council, and based on the way it was agendized, I would imagine that this property is was being discussed, but because it's a private property issue, and prior to the conservation fund coming in to have some conversation, that property owner had submitted for a rezoning. And so, so that rezone request was put on pause. You know, as noted earlier, the property owner did not accept the offer from the conservation fund. And because this is really a private property issue, I don't have those answers, but I will absolutely share your ask and your request with town manager Mary Jacobs. And I believe there are a few council members on this call that have heard all of these comments loud and clear. And so just rest assured that the passion and the desire and the messaging will absolutely be conveyed to Mary. So thank you for that. And I believe we have one more hand up. Is that right, Brandon?
Yep, one more. It's just labeled as PV host. So I will unmute you and you'll have the floor. And this will be the last one for tonight, but you are unmuted and you should be ready to go.
Thank you. Sorry for my screen name. This is Gail Mateer. I'm part of Preserve Vistoso, which is why you see that screen name. Christy just kind of covered a couple points, but I did want to just make a couple quick clarifying points about the golf course property, because I'm not sure if Mike, if you understand the fact that almost all of that acreage is already zoned for recreational golf. And so, you know, the biggest and most important thing for us, aside from what all of the other people have been saying, is that the town council uphold the general plan and make sure that that property is not rezoned, so that we do have an opportunity to acquire it. There have been offers to Romspen back when it was a golf course, and now they've, you know, and they keep turning down the offers and saying there hasn't been a reasonable offer. They were just given a full market value offer, a fair market value based on an appraisal, and they turned that down as well. And so property, as we've said, cannot be reacquired once it's developed. And so it's critical for those of us in the community to make sure that that property stays zoned recreational, so that when that opportunity comes up to acquire it, we can all step forward. We raised a lot of money towards that. We've not asked the town for money. We've simply asked for support in keeping the property zoned as is, so that we can continue to try to find a way to acquire it.
Thank you, Gail. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Christy.
Thank you all for hanging in there. We had planned on 2 hours, and it looks like we're at 2.5. So thank you to let's see, how many folks do we still have on board? I think we started at 99 and now we're dropping down to about 60. Next step is next week at the Park and Recreation Advisory Board meeting. They will be looking at the conceptual plans for the 5 park spaces that I mentioned earlier. And then that will be available for public comment on the Town of Oro Valley's webpage. You click on the Discuss tab, and then each one of those plans will be available to review and provide comment. When we come back early next year, we're going to take a deep dive into the connectivity analysis, come back and revisit those concept plans, look at CIP. And so stay tuned. The community conversation schedule will be posted on the town's webpage. And so again, thank you for hanging in there with us this evening. Great conversation, appreciate it. Thank you, Mike, for hanging in there as well. Have a nice evening all.
Appreciate it.